I know you love earning travel rewards and cash back, and that's why you're going to love Rakuten. With Rakuten, you can earn cash back on everything you need to book your dream trip, hotels, flights, rental cars, experiences, and more, while still booking through your favorite travel sites. And don't worry, cash back can be earned on top of earning the credit card points and the hotel and airline loyalty points that matter most to you, depending on how you make your booking. Plus, with Rakuten, you can also earn cash back on groceries and other purchases like electronics, pet supplies, and more. And the best part, you can join today for free and start earning cash back on top of your travel rewards. Go to Rakuten.com or get the app. That's Rakuten, Rakuten. Rakuten, the most rewarding way to shop.
Being part of a landscape and walking it step by step, it's as transformative as connecting with people in other cultures. So even now, if my husband said, "Oh, I want to go live in Kenya or somewhere that I hadn't been before," I would be willing to do that. I would pick up and go at my age and live. You could always say, "I'll go for a year. I'll go for 2 years." And, 2 years passes in a heartbeat. It's so quick. So you go and you experience something new and you see whether, you resonate with a place and whether you can connect easily. And if you don't, you can always bail. You go back home.
That is Terry Repak, today's guest. Back in the 90s, her and her husband moved to West Africa with 2 small children at the height of the AIDS epidemic. She seized the opportunity to connect with people of other cultures while bearing witness to the ravages of that disease. She shares today what she learned from that experience, along with the countless ways living abroad can be both rewarding and challenging. It's all coming up next. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Howdy ho, it's Jason here with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show, my friend. Thanks for hanging out, letting me bring a little travel into your ears today. This is the show to help you travel the world on your terms, to fill your life with as much travel as you desire, no matter what your situation or experience. Excited to have Terry Repak here today. You can check out our website at terryrepak, repak.com. She wrote a book. It's called Circling Home, What I Learned by Living Elsewhere, which is exactly what we're talking about today. Some of the lessons she learned living for so many years abroad. And her book, Circling Home, quote, chronicles the adventures and challenges of raising children to be global citizens and trying to find home in countries as diverse as the Ivory Coast, Tanzania, and Switzerland. Her memoir spotlights the complexity, struggles, and profound lessons at the heart of the expat journey, end quote. Of course, this is exactly what we're unpacking today in this conversation. Definitely some food for thought, whether you're abroad now, whether you're thinking about moving abroad in the future or near future. Feel like there are a lot of takeaways in this one, so I hope you enjoy it and stick around on the back end. Something Terry said is, I think, a great approach you can take to moving abroad. So stick around for that. And don't forget, if you haven't signed up yet over at zerototravel.com/newsletter, you can get our newsletter. It's free. Just sign up and it comes out once a week. I write it and you can get, personal stories, travel tips, recommendations, some cool stuff I found on the internet, some random things. It's a whole mix of mostly travel-related stuff. I think you'll enjoy it. So sign up if you haven't done so yet. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Terry, and I'll see you on the other side, my friend. Cheers. Terry Repak, welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend. How you doing?
Doing well.
You're on the East Coast now, traveling?
I am en route back to Seattle from a visit to my 92-year-old mother in Florida.
Wow. Okay. What part of Florida?
He was in Okeechobee. She's on the biggest lake east of the Mississippi, not including the Great Lakes.
I mean, Seattle to Florida is about as far as you get in the United States.
Unless you're going to Alaska. That's right.
Yeah, unless you're going to Alaska or Hawaii, I guess. But I suppose you're kind of used to being away from your mother in far distances, having spent so many years living abroad.
Yeah, she had 7 children. So fortunately, the other 6 are a lot closer than I am. So that makes life easier for me. I can freewheel since I know my sisters and brothers will pick up the slack.
That is one of the, I mean, we're going to talk about a lot of the lessons you learned living abroad, and that's at the heart of your memoir, which you're out with now, Circling Home. We're going to talk about that. This is one of the, because I'm an expat. I'm a Norwegian citizen now, so I live in Norway and been gone for a while, but it is hard to be away from your family and especially your parents as they age. Was that something that you struggled with when you were living overseas and even now?
Absolutely. Less so now because Seattle, you could still get on a flight any time of day or night, but it's what most expats dread is the call in the night about a parent who's had a heart attack or, someone who's critically ill and you can't get home. You can't get, well, it's not home for you if you're living in another country, but you can't get back fast enough. And you do feel this sort of push-pull that you're excited about living somewhere else and traveling, but you're pulled back because the heartstrings, tug you to your family, even if you have started another family somewhere else or you have your children and your partner with you. So, yes, that was, I think, the hardest thing as I got older about living overseas was worrying about people back home.
My mother has always been very gracious in saying things like, well, you have your family there, you can't I know it's hard to get back and things, just kind of being, yeah, I don't know the other word, gracious in that way. And it's true. Once you have a family and you're set up somewhere, so to speak, it's not as easy as it was to move around. That was a big decision. I mean, this is where a lot of your journey begins, going to Africa at the height of the AIDS epidemic with I believe it was a 1 in 4-year-old at the time, right? Living and working there in East and West Africa and Europe for 15 years. It ended up being, it sounded like it was sort of a, not temporary, but it was going to be a short-term thing to try out. And it turned into 15 years abroad, as things happen sometimes, as that's how life goes. But where was your head at that point, going into a place where, as a father and small kids, you're going to worry about everything, but going from like a place where you don't have malaria, for example, to a place where there's a risk of them getting malaria, or like, these are all like, there's risks everywhere, right? So I'm not saying, staying home is the safe best option either. I just mean, as a parent, you worry. And I'm sure a lot of these things were on your mind. And I think particularly the unknown, you're leaving the comforts of home. What was it like for you to take that leap?
It was really tough. And, we had just turned 40, my husband and I. And so we weren't young, but having 2 small children kind of upped the stakes for me. My husband was so excited about working in the public health sector in an African country and couldn't wait. He just was chomping at the bit to get to Africa in any capacity and work. And he had actually been born and raised there. He was born in the Belgian Congo, grew up until he was 7. So he had, and he also went back several times during his medical school training to do residencies in various countries. So he was very familiar with travel in Africa and not at all afraid as I was, because I had never been anywhere in Africa. And taking 2 babies, really, two small children, to a country that had a very high crime rate. And, all these tropical diseases. And we had to take, malaria prophylaxis and all sorts of things in the first year. So that's what kind of made me very anxious. But I kind of detail a lot of the first chapters in my book are about making peace with your setting and the people and the place around you. And that happened very quickly for me because I really reached out and befriended the guards who were working in the neighborhood. All the houses had guards in our neighborhood, just mostly as a deterrent from, any, um, not just petty criminals, but, terrorism, anything could happen overseas. So we became very close to the guards and the housekeepers and the people that worked around us. And I also reached out and tried to connect with the expat community and particularly with other women who had really become integrated in the culture. So there were a number of American women and women from Europe who had married Ivorian men and were fluent in the languages and very much at home in Ivory Coast. And those are the people I wanted to befriend because I really wanted to become uh, integrated myself. So that kind of after the first year, when I saw that we weren't going to get AIDS or malaria or Ebola, and there were ways to be safe in this foreign country, I really calmed down and just felt at home. It just took about a year.
Whether fears are founded or unfounded, it's the fear of the unknown, right? You're going from a familiar situation where there's a certain level of comfort, whether it's true or just the perception of comfort, even, anything can happen anywhere, to a place where it's unfamiliar and it's unknown. And of course, I think it's natural to have those fears. And can you talk a little bit more about the integration process? Because that is key for me, for a place to start to feel more like home involves some level of integration. And I'm wondering what that looked like for you. You mentioned connecting with these people, but I guess I'm fishing for some practical advice here for people looking to integrate quickly into a place they're going to be settling in and getting that home feeling.
I became a big joiner and really tried to find, book clubs.
Say yes to everything, right?
Yes, say yes. Don't turn down it. Don't say, "Oh, I don't know if I want to be that busy." Yes, you want to be that busy. So, yeah, join groups, go get involved in your kids' school, be a room parent or head committees there, like we had big UN Day celebrations at the international schools because there were kids from 60 different countries there. And I pitched right in and organized one year the UN Day celebrations. And through venues like that, you get to know other parents. You get to know their customs and preferences. You just want to connect. It's the most important part about living in another country is connecting. And I mean that on both the level of friendships and also just, talking to the guard who sits outside your gate every day and the gate of your neighbor and the person that's making street food on the corner down the street. You need to go and talk to them. You don't pass them by every day and just wave. So connecting is um, a deeper and a broader uh, feeling of home once you've made connections and you know people and they know you. And it's another layer of security because if they see someone following you who they think is shady or whatever, they're gonna look out for you. So I'm sure you found the same thing that connecting was good getting out and walking, if you're in a fairly safe environment, you know, walking every inch of your neighborhood and then walking into town, just knowing your environment and feeling part of it is, I think, critical to being comfortable in your skin in a new place.
So the first stop was the Ivory Coast, right? And this is in what, 1990 something?
93, yeah.
93. And you mentioned guards and all this stuff, which is obviously it's not maybe the typical expat scenario. I mean, a lot of people are moving to a lot of places where you don't need to have a guard out front of your home. Was that sort of the situation back then in that country, that if you
Not just then. In fact, in most African countries, and I would say I know in India, some of my expat friends had guards there. You have a guard. They aren't armed, but they sit outside your gate and they screen people who want to come in. Um, particularly in this day and age when there is the threat of terrorism and, acts against American citizens in particular. I don't know why we're catalysts for this kind of thing around the world, but we are, especially in African and Middle Eastern countries. So I think the incidences of, well, I don't want to say attacks, but people need a deterrent outside their gate, and it wasn't just Americans. It was Ivorians, professional uh, workers, and people who had nice houses had somebody sitting outside their gate. So, and it goes on today. It wasn't just back in 1993. It's every family where somebody is attached to the American embassy, you have to have a guard. It's a requirement, and the embassy pays for it.
Yeah, your husband was working for the CDC, right? So that was the tie-in. He was directing AIDS projects, and I can imagine some of the things you have seen. Well, I don't know if I can really imagine. I think back home during the AIDS epidemic, that was a time when I was younger, but you only saw visuals on TV or what you saw or what you heard about through the news. What was it like on the ground during the epidemic at that time? What were some of the conversations and the people you met? And
Yeah,
must have been heartbreaking.
it was heartbreaking. The difference between going to an African country in the early 90s and then in the 2000s when we went to Tanzania was, night and day and life and death, literally. Because in the 90s, there was no medication available to people in these other countries. In the US, we were developing AZT and other medications that would prolong the life of HIV infected people. In Africa, that wasn't available. It was, just astronomically expensive. So when we knew that, for instance, our guard, the man who worked outside our gate for, he had been there for 10 years, when he became sick and nothing was helping, no, cold remedies or intestinal meds were working for him, it became clear that he had something more serious. And he got a test, and he was like a double positive for both HIV and HTLV, which was another retrovirus in Ivory Coast. And it was heartbreaking because there was nothing you could do for them. There was nothing you could do for an AIDS patient back then. And so you watched people die slow, miserable deaths. Not to be able to do anything and to know that probably his wife and his baby, they were going to die too, was really, really hard. The most people could do back then, the um, caregivers and people that would go to people's homes was to help them, you could take meds to alleviate, your mouth fungus or your pneumonia, that type of thing. But AIDS was a death sentence. And we had two people in our household, close people, workers, die during the time we were there. And the seismic change was that in the 2000s, when the U.S. Started the PEPFAR program, which is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, and started sending billions of dollars worth of medication to African countries, people didn't have to die anymore. So in 2005, when we went to Tanzania, the focus of my husband's work, as well as most AIDS projects, was to get as many people as possible, as many HIV-infected people on the HIV meds, on these, it's like, it was called triple therapy back then. And people could live normal lives on these medications. So that was so uplifting to go back to an African country and know that people could be saved by these drugs and by the work that a lot of these public health workers were doing. Did that answer your question enough?
Yeah. I'm just wondering how being surrounded by that environment of watching people have these slow deaths and not being able to help and everything, imagine it's something you still carry with you today. How do you not?
Yeah, you do. And what you carry too is regret that, there was a man we had cooking for us several days a week. He cooked for a number of expats. And we knew when, in the last year we were there, that he had HIV, as did his wife and his baby daughter. And, I to this day lament the fact that a year later, HIV meds were becoming available in Ivory Coast in 2000, but he died before they were available. He missed it by months. So, yeah, that's the kind of thing that you don't forget.
We'll get back to the interview in just a moment. I know you love earning travel rewards and cash back, and that's why you're going to love Rakuten. With Rakuten, you can earn cash back on everything you need to book your dream trip, hotels, flights, rental cars, experiences, and more, while still booking through your favorite travel sites. And don't worry, cash back can be earned on top of earning the credit card points and the hotel and airline loyalty points that matter most to you, depending on how you make your booking. Plus, with Rakuten, you can also earn cash back on groceries and other purchases like electronics, pet supplies, and more. And the best part, you can join today for free and start earning cash back on top of your travel rewards. Go to Rakuten.com or get the app. That's Rakuten, Rakuten. Rakuten, the most rewarding way to shop. Now, back to the show. You went to graduate school for economics and political science, right?
Yeah.
So you have that perspective of the economics behind medicine and relief. That's one of the most tragic parts of modern society, I think, is that you have to use economics and money in the same sentences as saving lives. And that's just the reality of it. What do you see in terms of the landscape now around foreign aid for health issues? What's being done right? What could be improved upon?
Great question. I think we did a lot of things right as far as public health work and funds for improving public health in countries around the world, including China. I mean, we were giving money to China for years for hepatitis, AIDS, all kinds of work. So, what has changed? For years, for 20 years, Congress kept renewing the PEPFAR program so that every 5 years it would come up for renewal. Congress would renew the funds, and we would send billions of dollars to countries that couldn't pay for these medications on their own. This was a bipartisan effort, and it didn't matter. It was a Republican president that proposed and passed the first PEPFAR program. This year is the first year it wasn't renewed. So PEPFAR was not renewed for the next 5 years, and it's kind of limping along, the funds that go to these countries to help with particularly AIDS relief. It's limping along on a year-to-year basis because it wasn't renewed, and that's because of the partisan deadlock in our Congress. And so I'm very sad to see that and hope that the program keeps going. But, this is uncertain. There was also a huge effort for controlling malaria in countries like Tanzania and Ivory Coast. Malaria is a big killer. In fact, it was the biggest killer before AIDS. And the U.S. and European countries have poured a lot of money into providing bed nets for people in these countries and eradication of malaria. And that has largely worked. So, there is still a lot of malaria out there, but these programs are working as long as we keep funding them. So,
Yeah. Well, you said in your book, quote, after years of living overseas, I concluded that connecting with people instead of focusing on differences was the most fulfilling way of being in the world, end quote. And perhaps the politicians could take some of that advice as well.
I just wish everybody could go and live for a year in an African country, and they would be changed. They would be changed fundamentally.
How did it change your kids, do you think?
I have what I call global citizens in that we've sent out into the world. So my kids are fluent in French because Ivory Coast is a French speaking country, and they had that as small children. So they've kept their French. It gave both of them familiarity and an ease at being in the world. So they travel, they will travel anywhere and not be afraid. They don't go with the same fears that I did when I first went to Ivory Coast. They're just at home in the world. And so much so that my daughter, who spent 9 of her 18 years growing up in other countries, never really felt at home in the U.S. as she did in Europe. So she went at age, I think, 25, after working for several years in the U.S. My husband and I were living in Switzerland, and she said, I want to come to Europe. Can I have a friend in Paris. I want to go live there. So she did. She moved to Paris. We helped her because we were just a couple hours away on a fast train. And she lived in Paris for a year working, and then she went to Luxembourg and worked there for a year or two. And then she moved to London, and she has had several different jobs in London, but she met her partner there a couple years ago. And so she is now married and living in London with 2 small children. So it really set my kids on a course where the world was their oyster. They didn't have to just look at the U.S. as home or as the place where they had to, go to find jobs. They can go anywhere. And they also are really interested in people of other cultures. I think my daughter especially just connects so easily with people from lots of other countries. And she's a real connector. She's on all kinds of social media. It kind of set her on a path to being a really top-notch recruiter and human resources person because she can talk to anybody, anywhere.
Yeah, I think as every traveler listening, or whether you have kids or not or whatever, if that's something that happens down the road, you want that for your kids. Or if you don't have kids, sometimes you want that for a sibling, or maybe parents that haven't traveled a lot, knowing how transformative travel is. And then it's almost like you have those transformations yourself, and then you want to give the gift of that to other people, or at least give them the opportunity to experience those potential transformations. And certainly taking your kids overseas and putting them in that environment is, you're going to be in a different culture. Yeah. I mean, it's going to put you in a place where you see that, you can't help but see that, things are different than what you're used to at home. And that means the world's much bigger than I think even imagine. I think everybody has that mind-blowing moment where they realize kind of, as a traveler, somebody living overseas, you go somewhere for the first time, you're just like, wow, there's so much more out there. Like the more you know, the less you know, kind of thing. But then as a parent, like you said in the Seattle Times, you said, I've had to watch my children settle farther from us than I'd like, so it's like a be careful what you wish for thing.
Absolutely.
Maybe you got these global citizens who travel frequently and they work overseas, but now you're far apart, and that's hard.
Now I only get to see my grandchildren twice a year, so that is hard.
How is that? Right? Is
not fun? I mean, I like to go. I like to go to London to see them, but sitting on a plane from Seattle for 10 hours and then adjusting to an 8-hour jet lag is not a party. So, but you made a really good point that I'd like to expound on here, is that the thing that we give ourselves and our children is perspective when you live in another country. And you see that, the U.S. is not the center of the universe, and that we do have to be working with other people in other countries. I mean, it just expands your mind so much. I've seen it happen with nieces and nephews and people that travel overseas for the first time. It's like, wow, there's a big, beautiful world out there. And you want to see more and talk to more people and get out of our little kind of oyster shell.
You let people live their lives, and you want I want my kids to be themselves and to be fulfilled, but I don't want them to live too far away.
Yeah, I
If
know.
I'm even living anywhere, who knows? You got to just live your life and do the best you can to teach them what you can. And also if part of your life is travel and living overseas, and they're exposed to that, and that makes them global wandering citizens who live thousands of miles away, I guess that's the risk you take.
It is a risk you
what's
take.
The other side of that? You could keep them, you could stay in the same place and keep them there all the time, and not expose them to these things, which I think anybody listening wouldn't have that mentality. But let's say you did, and then that could have the opposite effect where like, I need to get out, and then they end up doing that anyway. So you can't control any of this. It's
Right. Yeah, no, you lay the seeds for open-minded, compassionate young people who will find their paths just like you found yours. I mean, if somebody told you when you were 20, hey, you're going to live in Norway and speak Norwegian and live there for the rest of your life, you would say, what? That's crazy.
No, but if they said that when I was like 25, after, going on my first solo backpacking trip and stuff, I would have been like, awesome.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Probably. But yeah, so it depends. Everybody has a different situation when they move abroad. Some people are doing it for a job or an opportunity, like you and your family. Others might be deciding to just, hey, I just want a better lifestyle, so I'm going to go to Spain because it's better than or wherever. And, so there's a variety of reasons. And now with remote work, I mean, I think like these types of conversations are valuable because more and more so than in the 90s, I would say, people are going to have the opportunity, or are taking the opportunity, I should say, to live overseas. And one of the things you said in the book that caught my eye was you said resilience was key to being content and adjusting to change. Equally important was my willingness to question preconceptions and judgments about events and people and remain open to whatever came my way. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think resilience is um, important for, both in children, but in ourselves. I mean, even when we get older and, I'd like to have my daughter and her children down the street or closer by, but I have to be resilient enough to get on a plane and, you know, schedule out months in advance my visits to these little kids. It does open us to all kinds of opportunities. Like, now I've gotten to know the English countryside a lot better than I thought I would. And the same was true when we lived in East and West Africa. We got to know different people and different landscapes than I ever dreamed of. I mean, I had seen like movies based, set in the Serengeti or in these beautiful landscapes in East Africa. But there's just nothing like seeing them in person and being there and being part of it. Like when I climbed Kilimanjaro, being part of a landscape and walking it step by step. It's as transformative as connecting with people in other cultures. So even now, if my husband said, "Oh, I want to go live in Kenya or somewhere that I hadn't been before," I would be willing to do that. I would pick up and go at my age and live. You could always say, "I'll go for a year. I'll go for 2 years." And, 2 years passes in a heartbeat. It's so quick. So you go and you experience something new and you see whether, you resonate with a place and whether you can connect easily. And if you don't, you can always bail. You go back home. It's not like you're making life and death decisions. So, yeah, I would be willing to pick up and go overseas again. And even to countries that are considered, kind of harder places to adapt and to live, because I mean, my mind has been blown repeatedly by uh, the beauty and the richness of the world out there, landscapes and people included.
Along the lines of that quote you were just talking about, the willingness to question preconceptions, judgments, remaining open, I guess was the thing I wanted to pull out. I think, when you're traveling, it's easy to remain open to like let me try. I'm not used to eating, like, let's say we'll use Spain as an example, just bring that up again. Like, I'm not used to eating dinner at 11, but I'm open. I'll eat. I've never had paella or some huge meal at 11 o'clock. Okay. I feel like it's much easier to be open to those types of experiences, but it can become more difficult when you're trying to understand and be open to the connections within the complexities of certain cultures. Let's say you're in a place where they don't treat women equally. Or, I know at one point you were speaking with somebody who was in a polygamous relationship, which was illegal where you were, but you're connecting with this person and you don't want to be judgmental and you're trying to like process all of this as a human. And there inevitably are going to be certain cultural constructs or things that perhaps don't resonate with you or are against your values or you don't agree with. And then it's trying to accept people within that framework that can be challenging.
That's a huge challenge. Yeah, I mean, something like polygamy, female circumcision, I certainly don't condone that and think it's great for girls. But, when you listen to why women did it, I'm not going to castigate them. It's done, or, uh, you do have to be open. You do have to listen to someone who says, "Oh, my husband and I had an arranged marriage, and I think it's the best way for young people to partner and to get together because your parents know, what's best for you." Okay. I mean, it works out in some cases, and that's what you have to admit and be open to. I mean, we have a high divorce rate. It's like 50% in most Western countries. So you got a 50-50 chance of hitting it right if you choose your own partner. I mean, so who are we to say that an arranged marriage is not as good as that? It's just, I love the fact that the Catholic Pope Francis said years ago, "Who am I to judge?" And, it's something we all have to say to ourselves, when you're dealing with anybody, your next door neighbor who's of a different political party and, is in favor of a different, how polarized we are in the US right now. And you have to listen to people. And if you can't agree on a subject, change the subject, find something you can talk about. There's always something out there. So, I don't know if that's a rambling answer to your question, but being open means seeing people as individuals and not as, "Oh, you're a Republican," or, "Oh, you're a Democrat," or you're something, you're a label. It's just, it doesn't get you anywhere. And it doesn't make you uh, a richer, more open person to think like that. So, yeah, I think that's what you give your kids, that same mentality of being open and not judgmental in the world. It's the way to be.
We'll get back to the interview in just a moment. Now, back to the show. What was it like coming back to your home culture after so many years abroad and settling in? When did you go back to the States? How long ago was that now?
That several times. So coming back from Ivory Coast, we brought our kids back at ages 6 and 9, and it was really hard for them. It wasn't hard for me because I had lived in Atlanta before that. We came back to Atlanta because it's where CDC headquarters is. And so I knew it, and I had friends here. Kids had a really tough time, especially my son, adapting to American culture. He wasn't like a sports guy or a ball boy. And so all of his friends were doing baseball or soccer or football, and he didn't fit in. I mean, these weren't friends, these were new schoolmates. He didn't find, and I didn't find it as accepting and uh, warm and welcoming as the international school environments where we had lived in other countries. So I think for kids coming back to the US, integrating in schools is much harder than going overseas. Usually overseas, if you're fortunate enough to be able to put your kids into international schools, you find a much more open, welcoming, fluid environment because kids are constantly moving in and out. So they don't form cliques like they do in some, uh, like in our country. Moving back here, those times was difficult. And I always sort of missed relating to people of other cultures and, you know, the ability to just at the drop of a hat, hop on a plane and go, like you can on EasyJet to Corsica or Sardinia or whatever. Um, but when we moved back from most recently Switzerland, that was the last place we lived. And we were there 4 years. When we came back to the US and we chose to live in Seattle, I was really ready to come and settle down and put down roots and try to really reconnect in my own country with, even though I didn't know many people here, with the new environment. And I have been so happy with our choice. I mean, it's um, for my husband and me, we love hiking in the mountains, being near water, cities that have good public transportation. And Seattle was a lot like Geneva in those senses. We're surrounded by two mountain chains and lots of lakes and, the bay with the ocean just, 2 hours away. So, and, it has one of the best public transportation systems in the country. It's fairly international, especially a big Asian population there. So I don't have to go far to meet people of other cultures. In fact, I volunteered to teach English as a second language um, at a local language institute so that I could meet more, people from other countries. So, I have everything I want in Seattle, and also the ability to get to my mother and to my siblings when somebody needs help or there's a family reunion or that type of thing. So I was ready to come back, and I'm happy to be in the U.S.
Nice. I think that's a great tip. I just want to pull out of what you said. When you come back to a place and there's elements of living overseas that you miss, in your case, connecting with people from different cultures, you found a situation where you could still do that at home. And that is an overarching practical tip I think anybody can take, right? Like, you come home and there's going to be certain things you missed either about traveling or living overseas. If you can implement that where you are. I mean, I find that just people that spend time, whether it's months or years on the road or living somewhere else abroad, you crave community after a while. If you're wandering around, eventually you crave community, whether it's abroad or home, and you want to find a place where, maybe you might actually see the same person more than once for a coffee.
Absolutely.
Because
Definitely.
like you mentioned, the international schools and being good because there's no clicks. But on the other hand, if people are leaving and going all the time, then that's the reality you're exposed to. And of course, when you live somewhere, anybody can, your best friend can move and stuff like that. That's just the way life goes. I would imagine in international school, it's more on average, you got more influx, people moving in and out, I should say, than you do at a
Much more. And that was
just
heartbreaking. I
average
mean,
community school. Yeah.
yeah, the kids would lose their best friends every year. Somebody would leave. And eventually, they were the ones that left and left best friends behind or boyfriends, or girlfriends. So it can be
I would
really
consider
hard.
that a big downside, I mean, yeah, what are the downsides or any regrets that you have? Or, maybe you're not somebody who has regrets, but if you had any of the whole experience of living abroad, for anybody listening that's considering a lengthy move abroad, what are some of the considerations?
Well, a big one is, as you pointed out, the timing for your kids. Like, when we were moving back from Tanzania, it was a really tough choice because we all loved living there. My husband loved working with, his Tanzanian colleagues, and the work was exciting, and they were, getting new meds to lots of people. But my father was having a series of strokes, and his health was declining. I was very close to him. My husband's mother was also declining. She had dementia, and um, it came to a point where we had to decide, do we go back and spend whatever time they have left on this earth near them, um, or do we pay more attention to the fact that our daughter has a boyfriend in Dar es Salaam, and she's going into 11th grade. So in the middle of high school, moving her back to the US and taking her away from her boyfriend and her friends, what's that going to do to her? Our son was graduating that year and would go on to college anyway. So that was not a consideration. He would be going back to the US for college. So with a tough decision like that, um, we chose to go back to the U.S. and we thought it would be good for our daughter in the long run because she's very talented, had a beautiful voice, had desires to go into musical theater and do more acting and that type of thing. And there wasn't a good program in the international school where we were in Tanzania. So long story short, we thought that it was better for her for her career. She could get voice lessons. She could be in the high school musical, things like that back in the US and to be closer to our parents. So regrets, I wish we had been able to wait for her to graduate high school there. Um, would she be married to someone and living in Tanzania at this point instead of in England? Possibly. Would she say she's happier where she is now? Probably. She was older. She didn't make that big decision, those life decisions, until she was 30 instead of when she was 16. So there are always trade-offs when it comes to moving anywhere. I mean, that can be across the country, just from Boston to California. But there are bigger trade-offs when you're moving overseas, and you weigh them, and then you say, nothing is irrevocable. If I move back to the U.S. to be near my parents, they may last a year or so. Then I could go back. I could go anywhere again. You just you make those decisions really by both head and heart. And our hearts were leading us back home. And I, to this day, am so glad I had 2 years with my father before he passed. It was, in some ways, our closest years. So,
Head and heart. You got to have the heart as part of that
yeah,
recipe.
you got to let the heart
Can't forget
speak
the heart.
too.
Yeah. Why the memoir? Because, you didn't have to write a memoir, Terry. That's a lot of work, a lot of reflecting, a lot of, reliving some things that were hard and joyous. And I mean, was that part of the point of a memoir? Was was it personal growth, or was it just a lifelong desire? Why a memoir?
All three, all three reasons. It was not a lifelong desire. I'm just a writer. I've been writing all my life. So I have journals. I probably have a dozen journals filled with descriptions of where we were traveling or living, as well as reflections on what we were going through, what the children were going through. I have this gold mine of travel documents that are both broad and deep, as far as what we were living through. And I also thought it was a pivotal time in a pandemic there had never been anything like AIDS before. And my husband's career spanned the 35 years of since AIDS was, they first started learning about it in the late 80s. He was doing research at the NIH back then. Up until today, when there is a cure and they're coming out with even a vaccine to help prevent AIDS infections. So the intention behind writing a memoir was multifaceted. Partly because I felt like I had all these rich observations of other cultures, other places that we traveled. It was something that I was bearing witness to the work that was done in African countries on AIDS, the biggest pandemic to hit the globe. Probably since the plague back in the Middle Ages. And for my kids, I wanted to give them something, but also my nieces and nephews and all the people whose lives I've touched and who've touched me. Um, I made sure that the guards the one we knew the longest got a copy of it. His name is Usman. He's in the book. He read it and he emails me regularly and wrote, it was like watching a beautiful movie. And, it was an opportunity for him to hear about parts of his life that, would go unrecorded otherwise. When I gave it to my son to read and said, just, review this and tell me if there's anything you want me to take out, because, you're protecting your kids first and foremost. Their privacy is important. And when he read it, he said, wow, I forgot so many things growing up. I'm so happy to have this document, this memory of where we were and what we did. So all of those were good reasons to write it. Also from my, family who never really understood. I had a brother who read it and said, wow, I had no idea of all the things you went through, even though we talked regularly back then. But ultimately, I find that in writing, and you really can distill life lessons and come to an understanding of where you were at one time, how you've grown, and who helped you along the way, who helped um, enhance that growth and made you a different person. Um, and I am such a different person from the one who first set out to live overseas at age 40. I mean, I I don't I can't imagine who I would be without all these rich experiences and the people that have crossed my path.
Well, congratulations. I think it's a lovely intention for anybody considering a book to think about it as something for yourself and maybe a handful of people, and then let it be what it will be when it goes out into the world. Of course, you want to market it and do things like that, but it's a great for the heart of a book to be like in this case. I mean, like you have children who can read this and remember their childhood, or the guard you mentioned, the close friends, and for yourself to process some of these lessons and everything. That in and of itself, I'm sure, makes it a worthwhile effort. And
I hope it's broader than that, and that in for a much broader audience, that in reading about what a normal American who happens to go overseas, and how transformative the experience can be to live overseas, to watch the arc of AIDS work come from where it was to what it is now, and how our public health has been impacted. I hope it's much broader than just, a document that's full of memories for my family.
yes, that's where I was going with that, actually.
Okay.
That, even if it was just that no, it's okay. But that as a bare minimum is a wonderful reason enough to kind of put the effort in, but then to create something, like you said, that has a broader messaging that other people can benefit from, I think that's the point of being here and sharing it, which is why I wanted to give you the opportunity to come on and talk about it. And then also to give you the opportunity here to share a bit more about where people can find you and the book and all that good stuff, so they can pull out the lessons for themselves.
Great. Circling Home, What I Learned by Living Elsewhere is available in Kindle and in any bookstore, through Amazon, and in audio form. I wanted to do the audio book to reach people in other countries that couldn't easily get, a delivery or whatever of a physical book. So, and I narrate it myself. So it was a fun project too. I'd never done anything like that. And I have an author website at terryrepak.com, and there are links to articles and pictures and places where you could buy the book.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. Thanks for talking about your experience today. And yeah, wishing you the best of luck with the book. And let me know if you ever come through this side of the world. It would be nice to meet you in
I
person.
actually do. I have a very close friend from Tanzania who lives in Drammen. So
Oh, okay. Yeah,
over.
that's not too far.
I know. I come frequently. I love Norway.
Okay. Well, hit me up next time you're here. Thanks for your time, Terry. Congrats and best of luck with the book.
Thank you, Jason.
There you have it. Thank you to Terry for stopping by the show. And if you think back all the way to the top of this show, the clip I shared where she finished up saying, you know, you can go abroad, you can try it for a year or two or even 3. And if you don't like it, you can go home. That is what I wanted to highlight here all the way at the end as we close out, because I think this is a healthy way to go into moving abroad. If it's not something you're entirely sure you're going to love, perhaps just try it out for a period of time. This theme comes up in the show time and time again. And even though it comes up constantly, and I think about it constantly, sometimes I forget to actually do it. I mean, the experimental lens, kind of framing, I should say, everything as an experiment rather than putting all of your sort of either hopes and dreams or like the fullness of you into it. I feel like that experimental framework, like saying you're going to move abroad for just a year and see how it goes, can provide a level of detachment that you just might need to get over the hump to actually do it. And I'm using the moving abroad thing as an example because that is what we discussed on today's show. But, you know, really, you can really apply that to anything. And more, this idea is just really helping me to, you know, put my best into it, but also detach from any particular outcome, and makes things easier in some ways. If that's helpful, go ahead and run with that. Maybe you want to reframe something as an experiment, something you've been stuck on. And I'm going to think on that as well as we close this one out with a quote from, well, I'll give you 2 quotes. One is from Winston Churchill. He always has some iconic quotes. He said, "If you're going through hell, keep going." And secondly, one from Ralph Marston, who said, "What you do today can improve all your tomorrows." Thanks for listening. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter. It's free. zerototravel.com/newsletter. Join the community over there. I'll see you next time. Peace and love to you and yours. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by zerototravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.
It's tax season, and at LifeLock, we know you're tired of numbers. But here's a big one you need to hear. Billions. That's the amount of money in refunds the IRS has flagged for possible identity fraud. Now here's another big number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, we'll fix it guaranteed. One last big number. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast for the threats you can't control. Terms apply.